Welcome to episode 5 of True Stories to Tell in the Dark. Today I have brought you a classic Reddit Let's Not Meet story, Violin Hill. If you haven't heard it yet, be ready to be spooked out because it's a very creepy one. A lot of people speculate this is the original smiling man from creepypasta. Leave a like, subscribe, follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Insomniac City, or search Insomniac City Productions. Don't forget to tell a friend, and if you'd like to support the channel, buy some merchandise at the shop, shop.spreadshirt.com/Insomniac City. Thank you guys, and enjoy. So I'm new to Reddit, and I just discovered this subreddit, which is great because it means I can finally share this story. I know it's probably said a lot, and as always there's really no way to verify it, but what I'm about to tell you is 100% true. I'm not talented enough to make this up. Around 2 years ago, I finally moved into a brand new house in a brand new building estate in Australia. I was one of the first to have a finished building in the area and was elated to finally gain independence. The first few weeks went by as normal, and during that time I'd often take walks along with the dog in the afternoons, roam around the surrounding estate area. All the roads around us had been partially completed, and all the other properties were marked out, but no other houses were built, excluding one that was directly opposite of mine. The house looked finished, but there was no driveway laid yet, and from what I could gather, no one lived there. To the left of my house, roughly a few hundred meters away, was a field with a huge hill in it. I later found out that the whole area was council property. Not only was no one allowed to build there, but the whole hill was basically a no-go zone. For whatever reason, the council just didn't want people to go on it, so the whole area was surrounded by a huge chain-link fence. The only other noticeable feature in the area was a small abandoned farmhouse with a shed a few kilometers down the road. I knew nothing about it and often went walking there with the dog, as it gave me something mild to explore amongst the vast nothingness I was living around. The entire place was dilapidated, and there was no possibility anyone could live there, but it was still interesting nonetheless. About a month or two after moving in, I awoke one morning to the sound of a violin. It sounded extremely distant and quite haunting. I actually enjoyed it and assumed that the neighbors opposite had finally moved in. Excited that I had finally had some people to talk to, I peeked out the curtain and saw the house opposite of mine was still vacant as it ever was. I got dressed, but by the time I managed to look outside, the violin had stopped. This happened roughly every second day for the next week. The violin would wake me up and then just disappear after about 45 seconds. I'd ignore it to the point where my curiosity simply got the better of me. And the next morning when I woke up, the violin playing again, I immediately jumped out of bed, threw on my dressing gown, and shot out the front door. I scoured the early morning surrounding, and there up on the hill was a figure playing the violin. It was barely light, but the person looked very tall from the distance, and as they were playing, was doing what could only be described as a waltz-type walk, spinning slowly around in a circle as they played. I took my eyes off the person and walked over to pick up the morning paper, and in the 10 seconds it took me, I heard the violin stop. When I looked up, I noticed the figure was no longer playing or dancing, but was now standing still, and most likely looking in my direction. It was so dark I couldn't make out any more. We both just stood there for half a minute, not moving, before the creeps got the better of me and I went back inside. After that morning, things started happening. On my walks, I began to notice the footprints on the surrounding properties that weren't made by me, that I had never seen before, which I just assumed were from people walking up from the other housing areas down the road. I never awoke to the violin, but I swore I could hear someone walking on the street next to my bedroom window in the early mornings. However, I never saw anything. Other real general things as well. Random tools such as spades and rakes were laid around the area, which I guessed were left there by construction crews, but I never saw anyone. I started getting calls at work that would hang up immediately when I answered, and I also stopped walking up to the abandoned farmhouse, as the experience with the violin player had me a little shaken. One night I was headed to bed. I turned off the television in the living room and again could hear the faint sound of a violin playing. However, it sounded more muffled and rehearsed. I froze and a cold chill flew through me instantly. Considering that it was about midnight and not the usual time I'd hear it playing, I went to the front window and peeked out to see there was a light in the house opposite of mine. It was clearly a candle, as I could see the dim light flicker in the empty window, and the music sounded like it was coming from an old record player. But in the 10 minutes I watched, I never saw any movement inside the house. I moved away from the window, sufficiently freaked out. After another 5 minutes, I heard the music abruptly stop. I peeked out again to notice the light was out now. I never saw anyone. I began to become unsettled in the house. Would often invite my friends over to hang out until late. But of course, nothing would ever happen when someone else was with me. I never bothered to tell any of my friends, as without evidence, I figured they'd just give me shit about it, and I'd just become more agitated. But nothing compared to what happened next. In my living area, the desk sits right next to a small window, which looks out to the fence surrounding my property. The steel fence is literally an arm's length from the house, and about 6 feet tall, so I always figured that, unlike most of the other windows, I'd never need to cover this one with a sheet or blanket, because no one could ever see in. I usually had headphones on when I played video games, and I always had the lights off, for no other reason than I preferred to play games in the dark. One night I was gaming. I got up and walked into the dark kitchen and got a beer out of the fridge. It was silent, excluding the faint sound coming out from my headphones. As I closed the fridge and turned to face the desk, I saw directly out the window 2 very faint lights. I didn't even catch on and immediately started walking back to the desk, fixated on the small glowing balls. And it wasn't until I had my nose almost pressed against the glass that I had realized the 2 lights weren't lights at all. They were eyes. A set of eyes, sitting just above the fence line, staring wide open at me. They didn't blink. They didn't move. My entire body locked up. All I could do was simply stare back, as my brain was still comprehending that there was an actual person looking at me in the scariest way I could possibly ever imagine. I don't know what happened. Either my head kicked into gear or my muscles loosened, but my body automatically collapsed and I fell to the floor. Scurrying to hide against the wall away from my window, I could hear my heart beating through the carpet like a drum. I tried to lay as still and as flat as possible. As my mind was still processing the sheer severity of the situation, a violin started playing. That fucking violin and the haunting tune it always emitted started up. Except this time it was directly outside my window, and much louder than I'd ever heard before. The lights were still off, and I wanted to get up to turn off the computer screen so I couldn't be seen. But my whole body just wasn't ready to cooperate. Not only was the sound of the instrument extraordinarily loud, but it sounded like it was being played out of frustration. Notes had been missed, frequently, and the strings were screeching. The pace of it was getting faster and faster, and by this time my dog Jeb, out in the backyard, had picked up on the situation, and registering an unfamiliar sound, gave one solitary, deep bark. The violin instantly stopped, and the house was finally dead silent, excluding my headphones, which I could hear quietly. I was still frozen to the carpet, and it wasn't until Jeb gave a menacing second bark that I heard the figure outside the window start to walk away in the direction of my yard. Once that first step hit the ground, I instantly thought of the welfare of my best mate, and finally, my head connected with my extremities, and my entire body kicked into overdrive. I leapt from the ground and slid across the laminated floor to the back door where Jeb was standing, staring into the backyard. I ducked to avoid being seen, and quietly unlocked and slid open the door. Usually doing so would notify Jeb that he was allowed back inside, but when the door opened up, he didn't even move. He was completely fixated on the pitch-black backyard. Everything told me not to go outside, but there was no chance I was letting anything happen to my dog, and I moved out onto the backyard. Moved behind Jeb, put my hand under his collar, and attempted to back him toward the house. Jeb is a pure Labrador and weighs like a sack of sand, so when he doesn't want to move, it takes a sheer force to pull him in the direction you want him to go. Right now, Jeb wasn't going anywhere. I yanked at his scruff, and as I did, he emitted a bark like I'd never heard before. A deep bellowing, fuck right off sound that elevated my nerves to an all-time high. We both just stood there waiting for some form of reply, and I couldn't remember how long we both stood frozen there. Eventually, I heard footsteps from around the side of the house begin to walk away, but not a simple walk. Almost like whoever was doing it was slowly dancing. The footsteps kept a beat as they drifted away from the house into the distance. Once I couldn't hear anything, Jeb licked his lips, gave me a look, and wandered back inside. I followed, locked the door behind me, and spent the night reverting to my childlike self, hiding under my bed covers with my dog. I didn't sleep a wink. That was the last time I ever heard or saw the violin player. The following morning, when the sun finally came up, I called in to work sick and called the police. They scoured the lot next to mine and found footprints in the dirt. However, there were so many there that it was impossible to tell whose were whose. The only description I could give to the officer was his height. He would have to be over 6 feet tall to stare over that fence at me, but they explained that he could have been standing on something, or on his toes. They also told me that they've never received a report of anyone playing a violin in the area, or anyone being in the fenced-off hill either. I essentially looked like an insane person, but the officers were very nice about the whole thing and offered to patrol the area for the next few nights, which helped put my mind at ease. Nothing else has happened since then. Over the next year or two, people finally moved in, and I told them the story about the figure I saw. The family still uses it to keep their children in line. One guy nicknamed the council lot Violin Hill, and the name has stuck around our street since then. I even spent a period of time scoring the depths of the internet for the violin tune I kept hearing, but could never find it. There were a few classical pieces that seemed reminiscent, but I've since thought that whatever tune was played must have been self-composed, which creeps me out even more. I'm still in the house. I still tell people the story, and I haven't changed my routine one bit, which has really helped me to block out the fear of the experience. I game with the blind closed now, though. Edit. I've been thinking more and more about the whole ordeal lately after writing this story, and decided to go charge up my old phone that was in the bottom of a box in my back room to see if there were any pictures from the past that I'd taken. Sure enough, I found this. A picture of Violin Hill from when I first moved in. This was even before the rest of the connecting roads existed, and there was just country surrounding me, and apparently a lot of broken toilets. People used to dump shit up in this area because it was just so empty. From my very vague memory, the figure I saw was standing almost above that red and white post in between the trees on the top of the hill. Like I said, they were very far away and the sun was only just coming up. The fence was also quite dilapidated and temporary when I moved in, but as more people started to arrive and the roads were laid down, the council put up a proper perimeter to block off the hill. Is it to protect the land they own, or is something more? Hope this gave you guys a clear image in your head. Thank you for tuning in to episode 5 of True Stories to Tell in the Dark. I hope you liked Violin Hill. It's one of my favorite stories on Reddit. I felt like I should bring it to you guys. And I'm going to bring you a couple more classic Reddit stories over the next few episodes. And they'll probably be standalone episodes because these stories are usually pretty long. If you want to support the channel, go ahead and go over to shop.spreadshirt.com/insomniaccity and buy yourself a shirt. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Insomniac City, or search Insomniac City Productions on either of those platforms. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like, subscribe, and comment. I love you all. Thank you very much. Don't be afraid. It's just the dark.